joyful and triumphant. O come ye to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born the King of angels. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let Love incarnate, love divine. Star and angels gave the sign. Bow to babe on bended knee, the savior of humanity. Unto us a child is born, he shall reign forevermore. Noel, Noel, come and see what God has done. Noel, Noel, the story of amazing love, the light of the world, given for us. Noel, Son of God and Son of Man, there before the world began. Born to suffer, born to save, born to raise us from the grave. Christ the everlasting Lord, he shall reign forevermore. Noel, Noel, come and see what God has done. Noel, Noel, the story of amazing love, the light of the world, given for us. Noel. Come and see what God has done. The story of amazing love, the light of the world, given for us. You stepped down from heaven, humbly you came, God of all creation, here with us in a starlit manger. Emmanuel, light of the world, here to save us all. Come, let us adore. Oh, come, let us adore Him. shepherds bow low, angel voices sing of peace on earth. What have I to offer to heaven's King? I will bring my life, my love, my all. Adore, come let us adore. Oh, come let us adore Him, the Lord. Worship Christ the Lord. Let all that is within us adore. Angels sing, praises ring to the newborn King. Peace on earth, here with us, joy awakening. At your feet we fall. Angels sing, praises ring to the newborn King. Peace on earth, here with us, joy awakening. At your feet we fall. Adore, come let us adore. Oh, come let us adore Him, the Lord. Christ the Savior of the world. He has come.
Well, hey there, and welcome to another Bible study. We're studying the topic of apologetics, how to defend the Christian faith, how to know why you believe what you believe. And if you're watching with our online campus live right now, we'd love for you to stick around. At the end, we will have a Zoom call where we'll talk about this together and we'll pray together. We'd love for you to join that right at the end. But today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the fingerprint evidence, so to speak, showing that Jesus is indeed the Messiah that was foretold. And frankly, the impossibility and the miraculous nature of Jesus fulfilling prophecies. So we're talking about fingerprint evidence. In other words, does his life, does his existence, does his identity match the fingerprints in the Old Testament? In other words, does who Jesus is line up with who was predicted in the Old Testament? Does the historical Jesus match perfectly all of the historical documents' predictions about God's coming Messiah? Does Jesus' fingerprints match the Old Testament's, the fingerprints we find of the Messiah found in the Old Testament? And so we've kind of been going through this idea of like a court scene drama in a sense. And so as we begin, the prosecution rises up and says, okay, even if Jesus meets the profile of an all-good, all-knowing, all-powerful God, which we talked about and established last week and the week before when we talked about Jesus on the witness stand. Even if Jesus does meet that profile as a person, he doesn't exactly match who was supposed to be God's representative, God's Messiah, God's coming Savior. He might have been a great guy, and frankly, he might have been spot on with stuff he said about himself, but he's not. You can't glorify him to say, no, this guy fulfills the entire Jewish religion. This is the guy who's worth giving up everything for. Jesus represents a departure from the Jewish tradition. So, in a sense, they're two different gods. There's the Messiah and there's Jesus. And we don't actually find evidence. We don't find evidence that Jesus is this Messiah. Now, just pause button really quick. That is significant. Because if Jesus is not who the Old Testament claimed he would be, then oh man, then we have so many things that we don't know about Jesus. We've assumed so many things that maybe aren't even correct about Jesus. But if he is, then there is an abundance of authority. There is an abundance of deliverance. There is an abundance of prophecy that is about Jesus and for Jesus and from Jesus. This Jesus becomes so much more significant historically, spiritually, religiously, and so on. And so it would be a good idea, if you were the prosecution, to try to separate Jesus from being this coming Messiah. If you can say he's not the guy, then there's a lot that you can't really say about Jesus from the Old Testament, because that no longer really speaks to who he is. And so the prosecution is trying to separate that. The defense gets up and says, Your Honor, it is a good idea to use probably the same principles as crime scene investigators to determine if what the prosecution says is true. If Jesus does claim to be God, and frankly the same Messiah that the Old Testament predicts, he calls himself the Son of Man, then he should have left fingerprints equivalent to what was spoken about in the Old Testament. In other words, the way Jesus lived, the things that he said, the things that happened to him, the results of his life should line up with what was predicted in the Old Testament. The thing about fingerprints is that no two fingerprints are alike. A person's prints should remain the same and should be only able to be matched to their own. So there does exist in the Old Testament something parallel to fingerprint evidence. That is prophecy. Now, one prophecy on its own, kind of significant. But then you want to total up the abundance of prophecies in the Old Testament that speak to who the Messiah is. There's almost 400. That becomes significant when one man is supposed to fulfill all of that. I'll spare you the details, but that is referred to in the scientific community as statistically impossible. Statistically impossible for one man to fulfill so many prophecies so exactly. So that's not even possible for one person to do that if indeed there is a person like that, right? But here's the thing. The defense is claiming that there is a man. The defense is saying, no. All of those are little parts of a fingerprint that actually come from one person. The prophecies of the Old Testament, they provide some amazing evidence for the claims and the identity of Jesus, the historical Jesus. Let's just take a few passages I want to walk you through for a minute. Let's take Isaiah chapter 53, okay? This is a prophecy, and it speaks to the historical person, Jesus. Isaiah 53 says, "Who has believed our message, and to whom has the Lord revealed his powerful arm? My servant," now that's going to be a key word for the Messiah, "grew up in the Lord's presence like a tender green shoot, like a root in dry ground. There was nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance, nothing to attract us to him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrow, acquainted with the deepest grief. And we turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we didn't care. Yet it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins, but he was pierced for our rebellion." He pierced, okay? Nail-pierced hands. "He was crushed for our sins. He was beaten so that we could be made whole. He was whipped so that we could be healed. All of us like sheep have strayed away. We've left God's path to follow our own, yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. He was oppressed and treated harshly, and he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep is silent before its shearers, he did not open his mouth. Unjustly condemned, he was led away. No one cared that he died without descendants. His life was cut short in midstream, but he was struck down for the rebellion of my people. He had done no wrong. He had never deceived anyone, but he was buried like a criminal and put in a rich man's grave. But it was the Lord's good plan to crush him and cause him grief. Yet when his life is made an offering for sin, he will have many descendants. He will enjoy long life, and the Lord's good plan will prosper in his hand. When he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he will be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous." Let's continue on. Another prophecy about Jesus. This is Psalm 22. Okay, Psalm 22 is actually a prophecy about the internal experience of the Messiah as he was suffering for the sake of sinners. Okay, Psalm 22. You might even recognize the first few words. Jesus quotes these while he's on the cross. my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far away from me when I groan for help? Every day I call to you. My God, do you not answer? Every night I lift my voice, but I find no relief. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you rescued them. They cried out to you, and they were saved. They trusted you, and they were never put to disgrace. But I am a worm and not a man. I am scorned and despised by all. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and shake their heads, saying, "Is this the one who relied on the Lord? Then let the Lord save him. If the Lord loves him so much, let the Lord rescue him." Yet you brought me safely from my mother's womb, and you led me to trust you at my mother's breast. I was thrust into your arms at my birth. You've been my God from the moment I was born. Do not stray so far away from me, for trouble is near, and no one can help me. My enemies, they've surrounded me like a herd of bulls. Fierce bulls of Bashan have hemmed me in. Like lions, they open their jaws against me, roaring and tearing into their prey. My life is poured out like water. All of my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax melting within me. My strength is dried up like the sun-baked clay. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You've laid me in the dust and left me for dead. My enemies surround me like a pack of dogs, and an evil gang closes in on me. They've pierced my hands and feet, and I count all my bones, and my enemies stare at me and gloat. They divide my garments among themselves, and they throw dice for my clothing. Lord, and he keeps going on, but just notice they divide my garments among themselves, and they throw dice, they cast lots for my clothes. Right? They've pierced my hands and my feet. He's thirsty. His bones are out of joint. All of those speak to fulfilled experiences in the life of Jesus when he was on the cross. Okay, let's go on. And since it's Christmas season, what I want to do is also take a look at some of the prophecies about the birth of Jesus. So you can go ahead and turn in your Bible to Micah chapter 5. Micah chapter 5. Now, Micah is right after the book of Jonah. But Micah chapter 5, verse 2 through 5. Here we go. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, you're only a small village among all the people of Judah, yet a ruler of Israel, whose origins are in the distant past, will come to you in the future, will come to you on my behalf. The people of Israel will be abandoned to their enemies until the woman in labor gives birth. Then at last his fellow countrymen will return from exile to their own land, and he will lead his flock in the Lord's strength and in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Then his people will live there undisturbed, and he will be highly honored around the world, and he will be the source of peace, the source of shalom, the source of restoring things back to the way God intended it and designed. Born in Bethlehem, of age distant past, who will come in the future. Okay, so when the Magi, these are the wise men, there's probably more than three. There's actually never specifically mentioned three of them. But when the Magi, the wise men, visited King Herod and asked where the Messiah was to be born, this Messiah king, that they saw the stars align, they saw this one star, they're following it. Herod turned to the teachers of this law, of the Old Testament law, and asked them, what did the prophets predict about the birth of the Messiah? And they would respond with some sort of like, that's an easy question. How dare you ask us such a simple question? They were like, easy one, Herod. Bethlehem. I mean, look what they said in Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, verses 2 through 6. Where's this newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we've come to worship him. King Herod, obviously deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem, he called a meeting of the leading priests and the teachers of the law, and they said, where's the Messiah supposed to be born? Without missing a beat, the teachers of the law said this, in Bethlehem in Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote, and you, quoting Micah 5:2, and you, Bethlehem in the land of Judea, are you not least among the ruling cities of Judah? For a ruler will come for you who will shepherd my people, Israel. They're like, that's an easy one, Herod. Everyone who studies the Old Testament knows that the Messiah has to be born in Bethlehem. But there's a problem in the biblical narrative here at this point, because if history was just allowed to run its course, Mary and Joseph were not actually in Bethlehem. Jesus would not have been born in Bethlehem if things had happened without great disturbance, so to speak. In fact, they were living in Nazareth, 98 miles from Bethlehem. So if you're walking, right, if you don't have a car or a jet or a bike, which they didn't, that would take 32 hours to walk if you don't stop walking at all with your very pregnant wife. So if history was just allowed to run its course, Jesus would not have been born in Bethlehem. He would have been born in Nazareth. There is no way that Mary was going to walk to Bethlehem to give birth to this baby if it were up to her. So it just so happened in the divine plan of God that King Augustus, living thousands of miles away, demanded that everyone under his jurisdiction return to the family hometown of the husband, or of the man in the home, the family hometown of the man, and be taxed and registered, counted. So even though Mary and Joseph were living in Nazareth, they were forced to travel to Bethlehem, which was the family hometown of Joseph, just as Mary was about to give birth to Jesus. Thus, as unlikely it was going to be, God ensured that his Messiah, Jesus, was able to be born in Bethlehem as it was predicted 700 years previously. So the fingerprints found in Matthew 5 even match the life of Jesus. Let's examine some more fingerprints in the Old Testament. Hosea 11. Hosea is the book right after Daniel, if you're having trouble finding that, if you don't spend regular time in Hosea with your devotions. Hosea 11:1. Okay? Check this out. Hosea 11:1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and I called my son out of Egypt. This is another thing that refers to the Messiah, the Son of Israel, the Son of God. So in AD 2, when King Herod learns of the birth of the promised Messiah in Bethlehem, right when the Magi come, in his jealous rage, he ordered the slaughter of every single boy under the age of 2 years old. The systematic wiping out of living babies under the age of 2. Now you thought, lockdowns are bad. Talk about mandatory infanticide. We read about that in Matthew 2, verses 13 to 16. But prior to Herod's furious actions, get this, prior to Herod's furious actions, Joseph and Mary had been warned in a dream. They were warned by an angel in a dream about this terrible event that was about to happen. Okay? And so with the wealth that was brought to them by the Magi when they brought the 3 gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, with that wealth they were actually able to escape to Egypt under the wrath of Herod. All right? So this is Matthew chapter 2, verses 22 to 23. When he learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son, Archelaus, he was afraid to go there. Well, let me back up. Verse 16. Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of when the star first appeared. Right, so the baby would have been 2 years old at the time. Herod's brutal action fulfilled what God spoke through the prophet Jeremiah. Another fingerprint left in the Old Testament. A cry was heard in Ramah, and weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted, for they are dead. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared again to Joseph, who was now in Egypt. And he says, "Get up and take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child are dead." So Joseph got up and returned to Israel with Jesus. And we learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son, so same family, Archelaus. He was afraid to go there, but after being warned again in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee, which is the north side of Israel. So the family went and lived in a town called Nazareth. This fulfilled again what would be spoken by the prophet hundreds of years prior. He will be called a Nazarene. So with his family, Jesus comes back to Israel out of Egypt. Just like the prophecy foretold that the Messiah was going to do. Let's take a look at another fingerprint, okay, in the Old Testament. And this is a prophecy about the royal lineage of the Messiah. This comes from 2 Samuel chapter 7. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. Let me get there really quick, so I'm going too far. 2 Samuel 7, 12 to 16. For when you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants and your offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong, and he is the one who will build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. I will be his father, he will be my son. And if he sins, I will correct and discipline him with the rod, like any father would do. But my favor will not be taken from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from before your sight. Your house and your kingdom will continue forever before me, for all time, for your throne will be secure. The prophet Nathan said that to David. In other words, there's going to be a ruler who will continue your royal line, King David, forever. Right? It's a prophecy that the Messiah must fulfill. He has to be born in the royal lineage of King David. So this matters, because if someone claims to be the Messiah, which Jesus clearly did, but he can't trace his family tree back to a specific royal family and then to King David himself, then we know that this person claiming to be the Messiah is a fake or a fraud. Now, this doesn't say exactly who this is, but it definitely does say who it's not. Okay, so this eliminates an enormous amount of people. You can only be born in the line of David. And just to add a quick historical note to this requirement, whoever this royal Jewish descendant of David was would have had to be born before the year 70 AD. Now, why is that? We don't find that timeline in the Bible. Because this was the year that General Titus led the Roman army in a siege of Jerusalem, followed by the complete destruction of the city and everything in it, including the temple. And this small historical detail becomes enormously important when you realize that the Jewish religious leaders kept extremely detailed ancestral records, making David's bloodlines to the Messiah possible to trace. Because the Jews, they read this prophecy. They knew that the Messiah, who they were looking for, had to come from the line of David. So they kept very detailed records, especially when it came to this particular genealogy. But after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD and then the subsequent destruction of all the ancestral records in the temple, no one born to a future generation would accurately be able to trace their bloodlines back to King David. So to make it possible for anyone claiming to be the Messiah to trace their bloodline back to King David, they would have had to have been born before the year 70 AD. Significant historical detail. So let's turn to the first chapter of the New Testament. This is the book of Matthew, chapter 1, right? Matthew 1 and verses 5 to 6. This is the ancestral record of Jesus, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Verse 5 says, so it goes on, so-and-so the son of so-and-so, so-and-so the father of so-and-so. And verse 5, Solomon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. Okay? David was the father of Solomon, and so on and so forth. We keep going down in this line, and we're like, oh, well, this is obviously a line that comes out of David. Where does it end? Verse 16. Well, I'll just go back a couple of verses. Eliab the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan was father of Jacob, Jacob was the father of Joseph, husband of Mary. Mary gave birth to Jesus, who is called Messiah. All those listed above, 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, 14 from the Babylonian exile to the birth of Jesus. Okay? So we see that Matthew, the tax man, very, very detailed, putting things together in the right line and accounting in the right columns, right? And this is Matthew the tax man verified the lineage of Jesus with precision of an accountant. And his conclusion, Jesus was from the line of David on his father's side, 28 generations earlier. And it gets better. Not only was David proven to be Jesus proven to be in the royal line of David through his father's family, we see in Luke chapter 3, Dr. Luke gives us another precise and detailed record of Jesus' ancestry through his mother's family. Luke chapter 3, verse 23, again, we start, now this time the family tree is not going from David down to Jesus. It's going from Jesus back all the way into history to Adam. Okay? But Jesus, the son of Joseph, Joseph, the son of Heli, Heli, the son of Matthat, Matthat, the son of Levi, Levi, the son of Melch, and so on and so forth. We get to verse 23. Oh, that was 23, I'm sorry. We get to verse 31. Eliakim, the son of Melea, Melea, the son of Menna, Menna, the son of Mattatha, Mattatha, the son of Nathan, Nathan, the son of David, David, the son of Jesse, son of Obed, so on and so forth. I mean, can we talk about royal pedigree for a moment here? He is doubly royal. Both his mom and his dad both come from the line of David. And consider this as well. Matthew recorded his gospel in the early 50s AD, about 20 years after the public crucifixion and the subsequent resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And the destruction of the temple was still 20 years in the future, 70 AD. In other words, there was still 15 to 20 years for people to verify and check the records of Jesus' doubly royal heritage. And the prestigious heritage of Jesus was a big enough claim, especially considering his claims to divinity, to deity, to being the Messiah, that I believe loads of people had incredible motivation to go to the temple in Jerusalem and check those claims against the detailed records that were readily available. It would have been possible to publicly denounce what Jesus is claiming here. To just easily go and say, no, your line does not go back to David. But judging by the complete silence of historical opposition to these enormous claims about Jesus, it's safe to assume that the people who were first exposed to Matthew and Luke's Gospels, at the very least, had no credible opposition that would have put an end to Jesus' testimony. In other words, there would have had to have been reasonable doubt or significant resistance to the validity of the messianic and divine claims about Jesus, and this crazy movement would have been silenced and relegated to the annals of history as just another crazy person with a few weird claims and followers. He thought he was God, but he had no credible facts to back it up. That's not what we see in the early days of the church. In fact, we see quite the opposite. The amount of precision with which Jesus fulfilled ancient prophecies, like the requirement of coming from Davidic lineage, is a testimony, just another piece of evidence to file into evidence of the validity of the claims of messianic fulfillment from Jesus. Okay, let's continue on. The prosecution would like to say certain things about Jesus fulfilling prophecies like this. First of all, you might hear this about Jesus fulfilling prophecies, that it was coincidence. Number one, reason to throw away messianic fulfillment in the life of Jesus is coincidence. Jesus might have fulfilled some of these prophecies, but that was kind of on accident. Anyone could have been born in Bethlehem. Anyone could have come out of Egypt, so on and so forth. Now, think about this, though. The probability argument says that it's so improbable that Jesus would have fulfilled almost 400 prophecies. In fact, it is hundreds of times more likely that someone gets struck by lightning 3 times in a row. That's way more likely. I could go on. It's for the sake of time, like I said earlier, scientists have referred to this probability as statistically impossible. It can't happen. It could not happen on accident. That Jesus would fulfill in one person, in one life, in one human, almost 400 prophecies about who the Messiah was supposed to be. Okay, so maybe it's not coincidence. Maybe it's an altered gospel. Like, clearly the gospel writers fabricated details in order to fit their belief that the Christ, that Jesus was this Messiah figure. They altered their account to make it look like Jesus was the Messiah figure. But remember, when we talked about this earlier, the eyewitnesses of these events, both for and against Christ, lived at the time of these claims being made and of these gospels being written. They could have very easily spoken loudly against and refuted such lies. But the Jewish authorities, frankly, they would have loved this kind of opposition, but they never had one. They never had anybody to make claims like this, because the early recipients, the early communities that heard these gospels obviously knew that what was being said was actually accurate to events that they had seen. So it was not an altered gospel. Maybe then, if it's not coincidence, not an altered gospel, maybe it's an intentional fulfillment. Jesus could have engineered things to appear as prophecy fulfillment, right? So Palm Sunday comes riding on a donkey. That's a prophecy about the Messiah. Comes lowly riding. Well, of course, Jesus could have engineered that, but how could he have engineered facts about his birth, his mom being a virgin when she gave birth to him, where he was going to be born, the things that were going to happen that made him go to Egypt, like the systematic slaughtering of hundreds of thousands of babies, right? How could he have engineered things that the events surrounding the timing of his death? You look at that and you go, okay, there are a ton of prophecies that Jesus could not have intentionally fulfilled, like engineered so as to make himself look like the Messiah. Okay, maybe there's the context argument, such as it would go something like this: the prophets weren't really speaking about a future Messiah. They weren't talking about somebody in the future. They were talking about somebody right now, just simply living concurrently with them. And then later followers of this cult hero named Jesus blew these prophecies out of proportion and wrote about him saying he was the guy, but really it was just somebody living in that day and age. Now here's the thing: what we know about prophetic literature, and this spans beyond just biblical literature. It's prophetic literature in the ancient Near East in general on a widespread scale. That we know that prophetic literature is meant to have a now and later, like a both and kind of fulfillment and kind of meaning. That they're written about something in the current time, also with later fulfillment. And so they have these like almost double meanings. It's kind of a both and in every case of prophetic speaking. Now we're not talking just foretelling, because prophecy is forthtelling. In other words, thus saith the Lord about what you're going through and about what is going to happen. It's forthtelling, explaining what's happening and predicting what's happening. It's kind of a both and. And when prophecy is spoken, in almost every case, the context doesn't negate messianic fulfillment, but actually enhances it. And Jesus is the person who fulfills that. So the context does not actually negate these prophecies about Jesus. Right? So we look at this, the abundance of prophetic claims about Jesus that are historically documented. And we say, man, one guy fulfills, frankly, one guy even fulfilling 8 of these. One guy even fulfilling 8 of these is so improbable. It's almost ridiculous. It's laughable. Let me demonstrate this to you for a second. Here's how improbable it is for one guy to fulfill even 8 of these things. Though not statistically impossible, the numerical probability of you winning the Powerball lottery. Now, I did this calculation in 2018, so this is a 2-year-old calculation, but you get the point. The chances of you winning the Powerball lottery are 1 in 292 million. Okay? In your lifetime, there are things that are way more likely than that happening. Okay, imagine having a baby that's born with teeth in its mouth. Okay, that's a 1 in 2,500 possibility. You getting injured by a toilet, you have a 1 in 10,000 chance. You being struck by lightning, you have a 1 in 13,000 chance. You winning an Olympic gold medal, possible. I hope some of you do it. You have a 1 in 622,000 chance. You dying from a local meteorite, asteroid, or comet impact, 1 in 1.5 million chance. Okay, you being killed by a shark, you have a 1 in 3.7 million chance. For you to die by a piece of an airplane part falling out of the sky, you have a 1 in 10 million chance. For you to die in a Grand Canyon flash flood, you have a 1 in 14.2 million chance. For you to give birth to identical quadruplets, you have a 1 in 15 million chance. For you to hit 3 consecutive hole-in-ones in a game of golf, you have a 1 in 156 million chance. In other words, there's no chance, barely a chance that that's ever going to happen to you. And so to win the Powerball lottery, you have to have it has to be. It's so improbable. You have a 1 in 292.2 million chance if you even played. Okay. Now think about this. Statistical impossibility for thermodynamic experiments is quoted at 1 in 10 to the 23rd power. Like 1 chance in 10 to the 23rd, which is insane. That's 1 with 10s. That's 1 over 1 with 23 zeros behind it. In other words, really, 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 really improbable. So improbable that it would never happen mathematically. That's called statistical impossibility. Okay? Now just take these 8 Old Testament prophecies. Born in Bethlehem, preceded by a messenger, John the Baptist, entered Jerusalem on a donkey, betrayed by a friend who received 30 pieces of silver, silent before his accusers, and died in the manner Romans used, silent before his accusers, betrayed by 30 pieces, died in the manner Romans used for criminals, crucifixion, during which his hands and feet were pierced. 8 prophecies. The possibility of Jesus fulfilling even these 8 is 1 in 10 quadrillion. Though insanely improbable of one person fulfilling just 8 of those messianic prophecies, it's still possible, but insanely improbable. Then you go on to say fulfilling 48, not even 400, just 48 of the messianic prophecies. That number rises to 1 over 10 to the 157th power. That's just over 10% of all of the prophecies about the Messiah. And already we're well beyond the realm of statistical possibility for anyone to accidentally fulfill this. And Jesus fulfilled almost 400 messianic prophecies. Any chance that could have been anybody else? Absolutely not. I want to propose to you that it's so improbable that anyone even would be able to fulfill all of these, that in the extremely unlikely case that anyone did, it would only be possible by the divine working of God who had meticulously planned the entire course of history just so that this one man, this perfect son, could be the Messiah that thousands of years of prophets and priests and kings had been looking for. It only ever could have been Jesus. And this should give you complete confidence to say that this Jesus is the Messiah and he's worth believing and he's worth following. The possibility that Jesus Christ could have fulfilled the very specific requirements on accident, by intention, by falsification, or even by misinterpreting is negligent to impossible. It's less likely than two completely different people leaving identical and matching fingerprints. Jesus fits the fingerprints we find in the Bible for the Messiah. Jesus of Nazareth is the predicted and prophesied Messiah, the Son of God.